Welcome back to another episode of Foresight by Groundline USA. We're chatting once again with Groundline USA President Christian Nolan. And Christian, as you know, today is Earth Day, so I wanted to center our conversation a little bit around asset management strategies and their role within sustainability. So, to kick things off, maybe explain a little bit to our listeners your perspectives on asset management's role within sustainability as a whole.
Sure, that's a great question, Trip. Great way to lead off. I think if done correctly, asset management is one of the essential enablers of sustainability for utilities. The goals of asset management are very much aligned to sustainability. In fact, the ISO 55000 standard calls out sustainability and environmental concerns as one of the key benefits of asset management. And so they're very much linked. So if you do it right, you look at your whole business and a better way to manage these assets through all the different risks and challenges along their life cycle, you will get sustainability outcomes that suit your business's objectives. So I think that they're very much aligned.
Excellent. Well, you touched on something that maybe we can hit on a little bit more there. What are some of the key challenges that the utility companies would face when trying to implement these asset management practices?
Yeah, it's a good follow on. I think when you start looking at asset management, you look at it according to the textbooks, according to the ISO standards, and you say, wow, this is a big thing. How do I go about doing this? And where utilities often go is they focus in on one aspect of it. And in a lot of cases, that's maintenance. So they say asset management equals better maintenance. And that's only a small part of what asset management is. And if you think about it being only about maintenance, then what you may end up doing is trying to implement a few loosely connected initiatives about better inspection of a certain component or better maintenance practices on power lines or something that doesn't necessarily tie back to everything else, which includes data management, includes financial management, it includes design, it includes system planning, it includes all these other things within a utility that need to be connected on some level for asset management to work as it should. So if you focus only on certain things without having an overarching plan, I don't believe you're going to get the outcomes that you should when you implement an asset management plan.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you mentioned a little bit on financial savings and all these big buckets that asset management basically covers. And anytime people hear financial savings, their ears perk up. So, this kind of sounds too good to be true, though. So, how can asset management help utility companies not only reduce costs, but also improve that operational efficiency, all while enabling sustainability? It seems too good to be true, really.
Well, it kind of is. And I think what I've seen from utilities and it goes into other industries because there are other industries that are further along the journey of asset management maturity than the utilities. And when you see these companies that are very, very mature in asset management, they make a lot of the business decisions fairly easy looking. Now, it's not easy. It's not easy. It never is. There's a lot of work being done. But a lot of the things that you see when you're not as mature in asset management don't necessarily happen to them as often. One of them being very, very reactive maintenance, very, very reactive mitigation of issues that pop up when you're not really sure what's happening. But if you do it correctly, you know where your assets are, you know what was installed, and just by having that information, you have a much better chance of responding to issues and predicting issues. And so, really, management of an asset from the time that you're conceptualizing it through to construction, operations and maintenance, and then decisions about disposal or refreshing the assets, those are all tied together with the right processes. The business flows a lot more smoothly and you still have risks, but your risks become much more sophisticated. You're making much more sophisticated decisions that actually move the business along further towards where your visions and objectives ultimately are. And so it's really important to get everything moving along like that because it helps you improve your performance just by virtue of putting in all these processes. But the key is you got to start at the process level, really put in some things that are in the weeds almost with a plan that helps you enable a lot of the improvements that will get you to where you need to. So it sounds too good to be true. The catch is it's not easy and it requires a significant change in thinking and a lot of work at the process and procedure level.
Fair enough. So a lot of work. How can a utility company go about balancing the need for this work in their asset management practices along with the goal, the end goal, or one of the big goals of sustainability? Where's the happy medium, I guess?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting question. The balancing of these two issues is I would say a part of the thinking that might need to change. It's more of what are you doing now and what should you be doing to balance the important versus the urgent? And I think that that's a broader challenge that companies and utilities have. And we get stuck a lot of times managing the urgent and not necessarily the important. So it's part of that mindset shift. Once you're in that vein, then you do have to think about, okay, how much money, how many people, how much time do I have to tackle the key parts? What I like to really advocate is starting with looking at your data collection processes and your data storage processes. It's very important to have the right data. If you don't have the right data about your assets and their condition, there's no way that you can make better decisions to get ahead of the curve and avoid problems before they happen. And so, what you can do a lot of times is start with some of the bad actors within your network and in your system and really dive deep onto how am I collecting data? What am I doing with that data? And who is touching that data? And that touches on your inspection processes. Are you doing the right things when you're inspecting? Are you collecting the right data, even if you are doing the right things? Where are you putting that data? And what decisions are you making? And so that ends up oftentimes leading to where utilities fix their data hierarchy processes. It fixes processes in the field, gets the right tools in the hands of people out in the field, and it really helps drive down issues with some of the bad actors. Because if you look that deeply into it, you found out some of the holistic problems with the bad actors. That will give you some really good early wins on the performance side, which help encourage you to take that way of thinking and that mentality of diving deep into your components and your assets into the next set of issues that you think is probably worth looking into. And it's sort of stepping through this asset by asset based on some of the objectives and challenges that you've got.
All right. Well, I just really have one kind of wrap up question before we end things today, and you touched on it a little bit in the processes just now, but what advice would you give a utility company looking to improve their asset management practice to be more sustainable, towards the goal of being more sustainable?
Well, I think the first one's going to be pretty obvious, but it has to be said. The executive management has to buy into the importance of this. What I've seen when it doesn't work is if it's a single executive's pet project and none of the other executives are aligned. Conversely, when the executives are all aligned, but they think it only affects a small part of their business, both of those are recipes for having the program go off track because what happens is you're not looking at all the interconnected parts that really need to be joined up for it to work. And so executive management needs to know that this is extremely important for the overall business. And there's going to be a lot of interconnectivity between people and processes and teams that's going to change how things are done. So that's step one for sure. But I think that one of the other pieces of advice that I'd really like to hammer into the minds of our utility folks out there is that you absolutely have to start with mapping out your asset hierarchy. It's very mundane, it's very boring, but you need to know at the upper level, hey, I've got a substation. That substation is made of these components, and these components have subcomponents, and these subcomponents have materials. And they have to have labels that are consistent and they have to be stored correctly and they have to be managed like that in multiple facets of the business. Then you have to go and do a similar thing for your power lines and then your PNC components within substations as well. And so I think that you have to look at each of these at the data level and come up with an asset hierarchy. And the reason this is so important early on is every piece of data and information that you're going to be storing ultimately will be tied to an asset. So if you don't have that correct, it's going to be very difficult when people are trying to figure out, hey, do I need this piece of information? Do I need this? Does this information get stored here or here? And if you just throw the data into random buckets or confusingly named buckets, then what you find out is people can't access it when they need to. So mapping out the hierarchy of the assets and coming up with defined, consistent labels is extremely important. And then you also need to figure out, where do you store that? Do you put it into a GIS system, an ERP system like SAP? Do you come up with something new? I'd always advocate sticking with what you have now. If you want to get to an ERP system, but you don't have it, but you do have a GIS, put it in there to start with, map it out, because it's about mapping out the process correctly. The system is not really the focus. A lot of utilities, sometimes they wrap up new system integration in with an asset management program, and that makes this whole thing way too big to tackle, and people lose steam, and it becomes just another flavor of the day. And so what I'd advocate is just stick with the systems you've got, map out your asset hierarchy, make sure you know how it goes into that, and then let everybody know through clear procedures of, hey, this is how we're going to store data. This is why, this is where it goes. You need to comply with that. That's a very, very important and complicated step, even though it seems very, very mundane. And I would always say, start with that. You're going to learn a whole lot about your business's unique challenges. And I think that that's a good place to sort of chew on for a bit of time until you get mature enough to do anything more than that.
Awesome. Well, Christian, that's going to do it for this episode. But thank you again so much for taking the time out of your schedule to share these insights and um, really offer these key pieces of information to our utility folks, to our folks out there listening that might have an interest or a need and moving the ball forward in these strategies.
Absolutely. I appreciate you letting me talk about something I'm very passionate about. I could keep going on, but I appreciate your time.
Absolutely not a problem. Well, be sure to follow Groundline USA on LinkedIn to stay up to date on all of the latest news and podcast episodes. We'll catch you next time.